My fork hovered over the neon green blob quivering on my plate, pulsating like it might sprout legs and sprint off. I glanced at my wife, Sarah, whose eyes sparkled with barely contained laughter, then at her friend Tom, who beamed with the pride of a man who'd just reinvented cuisine. This wasn't dinner, it was a dare, a culinary crime scene, and I was the unwitting victim. Tom had invited us to his place with the enthusiasm of a kid showing off a new toy. "You're gonna love this," he'd said over the phone, his voice brimming with confidence. Sarah, who'd known Tom since their college days, swore he was a decent cook, so I'd expected a hearty lasagna or maybe a roast. Instead, I stared at what looked like a science experiment gone rogue, served on Tom's grandmother's heirloom china. The evening started innocently enough. We arrived at Tom's cozy suburban home, the kind with a picket fence and a mailbox shaped like a birdhouse. The air smelled of garlic and ambition as we stepped inside. Tom, a lanky guy with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, greeted us with hugs and a bottle of cheap Merlot. "Prepare to have your minds blown," he said, ushering us to the dining room. Sarah squeezed my hand, her way of saying, "This'll be fun." I wasn't so sure. Tom had been Sarah's lab partner in college, the guy who once set a Bunsen burner on fire trying to enhance instant ramen. Since then, he'd apparently discovered a passion for experimental cooking, inspired by some foodie blog he found during a late-night internet spiral. "It's fusion," he explained as we sat down, his hands gesturing like a conductor. "Molecular gastronomy meets farm-to-table meats. Chaos." The first course was a salad, or so he claimed. It was a pile of microgreens topped with what looked like glitter, but tasted like regret. Sarah nibbled politely, her lips twitching as she caught my eye. I forced a smile, chewing something that tasted like lawn clippings dusted with sugar. "Unique," I managed, and Tom grinned like I'd handed him a Michelin star. Then came the main event. Tom emerged from the kitchen, cradling a platter like it held the Holy Grail. "Behold," he announced, setting it down with a flourish. The dish, his pièce de résistance, was a gelatinous mound, glowing an unnatural shade of green, studded with what I prayed were edible spheres. It jiggled menacingly under the chandelier's light. "Is it alive?" I asked, half joking. Tom laughed, but his eyes darted nervously. "It's my take on deconstructed shepherd's pie," he said, as if that explained anything. "Potato foam, pea gelée, and lamb essence spheres. All organic, locally sourced." Sarah's fork froze midair. I could feel her stifling a giggle, her foot nudging mine under the table. I stared at the plate, wondering if lamb essence was code for alien secretion. "Tom, this is bold," Sarah said, ever the diplomat. She scooped a tiny bit of the green goo and brought it to her lips, her face a masterclass in composure. I wasn't so brave. I poked the blob, and it wobbled back at me, defiant. Tom watched us like a hawk, his enthusiasm teetering on desperation. "Go on, and Mike, try it," he urged. I took a deep breath, channeling every ounce of courage I'd ever mustered, like the time I proposed to Sarah in a crowded restaurant, or when I faced her dad's interrogation about my career prospects. I scooped a wobbly spoonful and shoved it in my mouth. The texture was like jelly meets despair, with a flavor that screamed chemical spill. I gagged, then coughed, trying to mask it as a throat clear. Sarah's eyes watered from suppressed laughter. "Wow," I croaked. "That's something." Tom's face lit up, oblivious to my struggle. "Right, it's avant-garde," he said, launching into a monologue about emulsifiers and spherification. I nodded, sipping wine to drown the aftertaste, while Sarah subtly pushed her plate away. As Tom rambled, I started to see him differently. This wasn't just a bad meal, it was his heart on a platter. He'd spent weeks planning this, pouring his soul into this bizarre creation, hoping to impress us. Sarah had told me how Tom had been struggling since his divorce, how cooking was his way of finding purpose. The guy wasn't trying to poison us, he was trying to connect, to prove he was more than the sum of his failures. Still, I couldn't eat another bite. I glanced at Sarah, who was now openly grinning, her composure crumbling. Tom, she said gently, this is so creative, but maybe we're not ready for this level of innovation. Her voice was kind, but firm, like a teacher breaking bad news. Tom's face fell, just for a second, before he rallied. No worries, I've got backup. He darted to the kitchen and returned with a frozen pizza, still in its plastic wrap. We all burst out laughing, the tension shattering like glass. Okay, okay, Tom said, tossing the pizza box onto the table. I might have overshot with the gelée. Sarah reached over and squeezed his arm. You're insane, and we love you for it, she said. I nodded, relieved to see pepperoni in my future. As we ate the pizza, the mood shifted. Tom opened up about his divorce, how he'd lost his job as a lab tech and felt like he was losing himself. Cooking, he said, was his way of starting over, of daring to be bold again. I just wanted to make something unforgettable, he admitted, his voice soft. Sarah and I exchanged a glance, and I felt a pang of guilt for mocking his efforts. Tom, I said, leaning forward, this night is unforgettable. Not because of the food, though. Man, that green stuff's gonna haunt me, but because you took a risk. That's more than most people do. Sarah nodded, her eyes warm. You're gonna figure this out, she added, and we'll be here, eating your next masterpiece. Tom smiled, a real one this time, not the nervous grin he'd worn all night. We clinked our wine glasses, toasting to friendship, failure, and the courage to try again. The pizza was mediocre, but it tasted like redemption. As we drove home, Sarah rested her head on my shoulder. You were kind to him, she said. He needed that. I shrugged, still tasting the ghost of pea gelée. Yeah. Well, I'm not eating his food again unless it's takeout. She laughed, and we drove into the night, the memory of Tom's glowing dish lingering like a strange, bittersweet dream. So, what do you think? Was Tom's culinary disaster a bold move or a total misfire? Should we have been honest about the food, or was kindness the better choice? Share your thoughts. What would you have done?